The grand ballroom of the Westmore Hotel sparkled under the light of crystal chandeliers. Tonight was the annual Symphony Charity Ball, the most prestigious musical event of the year. For the wealthy attendees in their designer outfits, this was just another Friday night. For Elena Ruiz, it was a glimpse into a world she desperately wanted to join. Elena wasn't supposed to be here. Not really. Not as a waitress, anyway. The 24-year-old adjusted her black bow tie and smoothed down her white uniform shirt. She caught her reflection in one of the ornate mirrors lining the hallway and took a deep breath. This wasn't how she had imagined attending the symphony ball, but life hadn't exactly followed her plans lately. Ruiz.
Stop daydreaming and grab these champagne trays.
Her supervisor, Mrs. Chen, called from the kitchen doorway. The guests are arriving and we need everyone on the floor now. Elena hurried over, balancing the heavy silver tray with practiced ease. 6 months of waitressing had given her strong wrists, if nothing else. She pushed through the swinging doors and entered the ballroom, immediately adopting the invisible smile that service workers perfect, present enough to seem pleasant but not so noticeable as to draw attention. Remember, Mrs. Chen whispered as she passed, these people donated at least $5,000 each to be here tonight. The tips could be good if you stay sharp, Elena nodded. She needed those tips. Her tuition payment for the final semester at City Conservatory was due in 2 weeks, and her bank account was still painfully short. The ball was already filling with the city's elite. Banking executives, real estate developers, old money families, and, most importantly to Elena, the stars of the classical music world. Conductors, composers, and performers whose careers she followed religiously were mingling just feet away from her. She weaved through the crowd, offering champagne and collecting empty glasses. Most guests barely acknowledged her, taking and discarding drinks without a glance in her direction. She didn't mind. It gave her the freedom to observe. Elena paused near a small gathering where the symphony director, a round man with kind eyes named Dr. Rivera, was speaking animatedly, and were so honored to have him perform tonight. His latest recording of Chopin's Nocturnes broke streaming records last month. I never thought I'd see classical music trending online. Elena knew instantly who they were discussing. Viktor Rostov, the pianist whose videos she had studied for countless hours, whose technique had inspired her own playing since she was 12. The Russian-born musician was a genuine celebrity, even outside classical music circles. Handsome, charismatic, and undeniably brilliant. Is he here yet? A woman in a red gown asked. Making an entrance, as always, Dr. Rivera replied with a small smile. His car just pulled up outside. Elena felt her heart beat faster. She had never seen Viktor Rostov in person. Concert tickets to his performances sold out within minutes and cost more than she earned in a week. Now he would be in the same room as her. As if on cue, a stir rippled through the ballroom. Elena turned to see a slim man in his late 30s enter through the main doors. His tailored black suit contrasted with a slightly rebellious touch, longer than conventional dark hair that fell across his forehead. Viktor Rostov had arrived. A small entourage followed him, his manager, a couple Elena recognized as minor celebrities, and a young woman who clung to his arm with practiced familiarity. They moved through the crowd like royalty, stopping occasionally as people rushed to greet them. That's the third girlfriend this year, Mrs. Chen muttered as she passed Elena. These famous types never settle down. Elena watched as Viktor charmed everyone around him. His smile seemed to transform whoever it landed on, making them stand taller, laugh louder. He moved with confidence that bordered on arrogance, but he was careful to shake hands with the important donors and pose for photos when asked. Ruiz. Table 6 needs service, Mrs. Chen called, snapping Elena back to reality. Table 6. Elena glanced at her section chart and felt her stomach drop. Table 6 was Viktor Rostov's table. She gathered her courage and approached with a fresh tray of champagne. The conversation at the table was lively, with Viktor telling a story that had everyone leaning in to catch every word. And then the conductor actually stopped the entire orchestra and asked if I could please follow the tempo markings as written. Viktor delivered the punchline with perfect timing, and everyone erupted in laughter. Excuse me, Elena said softly. Would anyone like champagne? Most at the table reached for glasses without acknowledging her, but Viktor glanced up briefly. Their eyes met for a split second before he returned to his story. Elena felt a small thrill at even this momentary connection with her musical hero. She continued serving, moving methodically around the ballroom while stealing glances at Victor's table. He dominated every conversation, his hands gesturing expressively as he spoke. Those same hands that created such beautiful music were now emphasizing points in a debate about the current symphony season. Dinner was served at 8, a lavish 5-course meal that kept the waitstaff running between the kitchen and ballroom. Elena moved efficiently, delivering plates of delicate fish and tender beef to her assigned tables. Everything was going smoothly until disaster struck. She was delivering water to Victor's table when someone pushed back their chair unexpectedly, bumping her arm. The crystal pitcher tilted, sending water streaming across the pristine white tablecloth, directly toward Viktor Rostov. He jumped up quickly, avoiding most of the spill, but droplets had caught the sleeve of his expensive suit jacket. "I'm so sorry," Elena gasped, mortified. She grabbed napkins and began blotting the tablecloth frantically. Victor looked down at her, his expression shifting from surprise to something harder. "Perhaps the help should focus more on service and less on eavesdropping," he said coldly. Elena felt heat rush to her face. "It was an accident, sir. I apologize." "An accident that wouldn't happen to someone properly trained," he replied, brushing at his sleeve with exaggerated care. Then turning to his companions with a theatrical whisper just loud enough for Elena to hear, he added, "This is why I prefer private events with professional staff." The others at the table chuckled, and Elena felt the sting of humiliation burn deeper. This man whose music had moved her to tears countless times, whose artistry she had admired for years, was deliberately making her feel small. "I'll get fresh water," she mumbled, retreating quickly. In the kitchen, Elena took a moment to compose herself, blinking back unexpected tears. She had encountered rude customers before, but this felt different. More personal somehow. "Everything okay?" Mrs. Chen asked, noticing Elena's expression. "Fine, just a small spill at table 6. Mrs. Chen grimaced. "Rostov's table? Watch that one. I've served him before at other events. Brilliant musician, but terrible tipper and worse attitude. Don't let him get to you." Elena nodded, but the encounter had shaken her. She had built Victor up in her mind for so long, imagining a depth and sensitivity that matched his playing. The reality was disappointing. When she returned to the table with fresh water, Victor was regaling his audience with another story. As she carefully poured, making sure to stay well away from his sleeve, she caught fragments of conversation. "These conservatory students think technique is everything," he was saying. "They graduate with perfect scales and no soul. That's why I rarely take on students anymore, too much remedial work needed." Elena stiffened. As a conservatory student herself, the dismissive generalization stung. "Don't you teach master classes at Juilliard?" someone asked. "Occasionally, when they can afford me," Victor replied with a self-satisfied smile. "But finding true talent is rare. Most are just adequate." Elena finished pouring and stepped back, trying to make herself invisible. But Victor turned, catching her eye again. "Still here?" he asked with a raised eyebrow. "I think we're fine for now." The dismissal was pointed. As she walked away, she heard him add to the table, "Perhaps we should request plastic cups for the rest of the evening. Safer for everyone involved." Fresh laughter followed Elena as she retreated, her hands shaking with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. The man was deliberately cruel, using his status to belittle someone he saw as beneath him. For the next hour, Elena avoided table 6 as much as possible, asking another server to handle their dessert service. She focused on her other tables, maintaining her professional smile despite the knot in her stomach. As dinner concluded, Dr. Rivera approached the small stage set up at the front of the ballroom. He tapped the microphone, gaining everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for your generous support of our city's symphony. Tonight's donations will fund our youth outreach program for another full year." Polite applause followed this announcement. Now, before our main performance by the incomparable Viktor Rostov, we had planned a short opening piece by Professor Liang from the City Conservatory. Dr. Rivera's expression grew apologetic. "Unfortunately, Professor Liang was taken ill this afternoon and cannot join us." A murmur of disappointment spread through the crowd. Elena, who had studied with Professor Liang, felt a pang of concern for her mentor. "So," Dr. Rivera continued, "we find ourselves with a small gap in our program. Is there perhaps anyone who might step in to play a brief introduction before Maestro Rostov's performance? The ballroom fell silent. Guests looked at each other uncomfortably. Many were music appreciators, but not performers themselves. From across the room, Elena saw Mrs. Chen watching her with a thoughtful expression. Their eyes met, and Mrs. Chen gave her a small, encouraging nod. Elena's heart began to race. Could she? Should she? The grand piano gleamed under the spotlights, both inviting and intimidating. She thought of Victor's dismissive comments about conservatory students, his casual cruelty towards someone he saw as just the help. She thought of the tuition bill waiting for her, and the years she had spent practicing while other kids were having fun. Something shifted inside her. Sometimes opportunities appeared in the most unexpected places, and sometimes you had to create your own. Taking a deep breath, Elena set down her serving tray. Elena's heart pounded against her ribs as she took a step forward. Then another. The crowd's murmuring faded to background noise as she focused on the gleaming grand piano ahead. "I can play," she said, her voice barely audible at first. Then, clearing her throat, she spoke more firmly. "I can play something, if that would help." Dr. Rivera turned toward her voice, surprise crossing his features when he realized the offer came from a waitress. He hesitated, clearly uncertain. Mrs. Chen stepped forward. "She's a student at City Conservatory," she said quickly. "Final year, studying with Professor Liang himself." Relief washed over Dr. Rivera's face. "Well, that's wonderful. Please, come up." Elena felt dozens of eyes following her as she made her way to the stage. She was acutely aware of her waitress uniform. The black pants and white shirt a stark contrast to the formal gowns and tuxedos in the audience. From the corner of her eye, she caught Victor Rostov watching her with obvious amusement, whispering something that made his companions chuckle. As she approached the piano, Dr. Rivera asked quietly, "What will you be playing for us, Miss?" Elena Ruiz," she replied, her mouth dry. "I'll play Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, first movement." Dr. Rivera's eyebrows shot up. It was an ambitious choice, one of the most technically challenging pieces in the classical repertoire. But Elena knew it by heart. She had been practicing it for months for her upcoming recital. "Very well, Miss Ruiz," he said, then turned to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a fortunate solution to our program gap. Elena Ruiz, a final-year student at our very own City Conservatory, will perform Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. A polite smattering of applause followed as Elena took her seat at the bench. She adjusted it slightly, positioned her hands, and took a deep breath. From a nearby table, she heard Victor's voice carry clearly. "This should be educational." More suppressed laughter followed. Elena closed her eyes, shutting out everything, the crowd, Victor's mockery, her own anxiety. She focused on the weight of her fingers against the cool ivory keys. Then, without further hesitation, she began to play. The opening chords of Rachmaninoff's masterpiece filled the ballroom, deep and resonant. Elena leaned into the music, allowing her body to become a vessel for the composer's vision. The slow building intensity of the introduction gave way to faster, more complex passages, and her fingers danced across the keys with precision, born of countless hours of practice. As she played, Elena felt herself disappearing into the piece. This was why she had fallen in love with the piano at age 6. This transcendent feeling when performer and instrument became one, when nothing existed except the next note, the next phrase, the next emotion to express. The audience had fallen completely silent. Even the servers had paused their work to listen. Elena didn't see any of this. Her eyes remained closed, her world narrowed to just the piano and the music flowing through her. But she sensed the shift in the room's energy, felt the collective breath being held. When she reached the piece's emotional climax, her hands moving in a blur of controlled passion, she finally opened her eyes. The first person she saw was Victor Rostov. Gone was the smirk, the mocking amusement. His face had transformed entirely. He was leaning forward in his chair, eyes wide with what looked like disbelief mixed with something else. Recognition, perhaps. Recognition of a fellow artist. Elena allowed herself a small private smile and threw herself into the final section of the movement. Her technique wasn't perfect. There were a few minor slips that probably only other pianists would notice, but her emotional Interpretation was fearless and authentic. As the final notes lingered in the air, Elena released the pedal and slowly lifted her hands from the keys. For a moment, complete silence filled the ballroom. Then the applause began. It started with a single person, Dr. Rivera, and quickly swept through the room like wildfire. People rose to their feet, their faces alight with genuine appreciation. Elena stood from the bench, slightly dizzy from the intensity of the performance, and offered a modest bow. "Brava, brava," someone called out. Elena looked up to see Mrs. Chen beaming with pride. Next to her, several of the other waitstaff were applauding enthusiastically, though trying to remain somewhat professional. Dr. Rivera returned to the microphone, his face flushed with excitement. "Well, I think we can all agree that was far more than just filling a gap in our program. Miss Ruiz, thank you for that extraordinary performance." Elena nodded her thanks and prepared to leave the stage, ready to return to her serving duties. But Dr. Rivera stopped her with a gentle hand on her arm. "Wait," he said quietly. "Stay a moment." He turned back to the audience, who were still applauding. "Ladies and gentlemen, what a remarkable reminder of why we support musical education in our city. Miss Ruiz represents exactly the kind of talent our programs nurture." Elena felt a rush of gratitude for his kindness. This unexpected spotlight was both terrifying and exhilarating. As the applause finally died down, Elena made her way back toward the kitchen, unsure if she should resume her serving duties or not. She was stopped halfway by an older woman in an elegant blue gown. "That was magnificent, my dear," the woman said, grasping Elena's hand. "Absolutely magnificent. Are you performing anywhere else soon?" "I'd love to attend a full recital. I have my graduation recital next month at the conservatory," Elena replied, still feeling slightly dazed. "It's open to the public." "I'll be there," the woman promised, pressing a business card into Elena's palm. "And I'm on the board of the Women's Musical Arts Foundation. We should talk about our young artist program." Before Elena could properly respond, someone else approached to compliment her, and then another. What had begun as a mortifying evening was transforming into something entirely different. People who had looked through her all night were now seeing her, really seeing her. Through the small crowd gathering around her, Elena spotted Victor Rostov. He remained seated at his table, watching the scene unfold with an unreadable expression. Their eyes met briefly, and Elena thought she saw a small nod of acknowledgement, though it might have been her imagination. Mrs. Chen appeared at her side, somehow managing to look both thrilled and practical. "The kitchen needs to know if you're returning to service or not," she said quietly. "Dr. Rivera suggested you're off duty for the rest of the night, as our guest performer now." Her eyes twinkled with pride. Elena felt a wave of relief. As much as she needed the money from tonight, the thought of returning to serve tables after that performance felt impossibly awkward. "Thank you," she whispered to Mrs. Chen, "for encouraging me to play." "I didn't do anything," Mrs. Chen replied. "That was all you." The crowd around Elena gradually dispersed as people returned to their tables, though many continued to glance her way and whisper to their companions. She found herself suddenly unsure of what to do or where to go. She wasn't staff anymore, but she certainly wasn't a guest either. Dr. Rivera solved the problem by approaching with a kind smile. "Miss Ruiz, would you join me at the director's table? We have an empty seat, and I'd love to introduce you to some people who should know about your talent." Elena followed him to a table near the front of the room, hyper-aware of her waitress uniform among the designer gowns and tuxedos. But the people at the table, mostly older patrons of the arts, and a few musicians, welcomed her warmly. "I've heard Professor Liang speak highly of a promising student," said a white-haired man who introduced himself as the chairman of the symphony board. "I wonder if you're the one he mentioned," Elena smiled. "He's been a wonderful teacher. I hope I've done him proud tonight." "More than proud, I'd say," the chairman replied. "Tell me, what are your plans after graduation?" As Elena began to explain her hopes for a master's program, if she could find the funding, she noticed movement on the stage. The technical crew was adjusting the piano, and Victor Rostov was making his way toward the platform for his scheduled performance. The audience's attention shifted as Victor took the stage with his characteristic confidence. He nodded to the applauding crowd, then stepped up to the microphone. "Good evening," he said, his voice rich with his slight Russian accent. Before I begin my prepared program, I would like to say something. Elena felt her stomach tighten. Would he make some dismissive remark about her performance? Some backhanded compliment to reinforce his superior status? Victor surveyed the room, his gaze eventually finding Elena at the director's table. We have just witnessed something special, he said, his tone surprisingly sincere. As musicians, we spend our lives chasing those rare moments when technical skill and emotional truth align perfectly. Miss Ruiz reminded us all what that sounds like. A fresh round of applause broke out and Elena felt her cheeks grow warm. So, Victor continued with a small smile, I find myself in the unusual position of being the follow-up act. This drew appreciative laughter from the crowd. I will do my best to maintain the high standard that has been set tonight. With a slight bow, he moved to the piano bench and began his performance. A program of Chopin that showcased his famous technical brilliance and interpretation. Elena watched, still barely believing the evening's turn of events. Victor played beautifully, his reputation clearly well-deserved. But something had shifted in the room. There were now two artists present, not one. And tomorrow people would remember not just Victor Rostov's flawless Chopin, but also the waitress who had stunned everyone with her Rachmaninoff. As the evening wound down, Elena found herself exchanging contact information with several influential people in the music world. Even in her wildest dreams, she couldn't have imagined networking like this before graduation. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur for Elena. Victor Rostov's performance had been flawless, as expected, but she noticed something different in the way people watched him now. There was still admiration, certainly, but the air of untouchable reverence had diminished. Perhaps seeing someone unexpected play with such passion had reminded them that great music could come from anywhere, not just from celebrated stars. As the event wound down, Elena found herself surrounded by well-wishers and new connections. She'd collected more business cards tonight than in her entire life before. A music critic had asked for an interview. The dean of a prestigious music school had mentioned scholarship opportunities. It was overwhelming. Miss Ruiz. A familiar accented voice cut through the chatter. Elena turned to find Victor Rostov standing behind her, his expression carefully neutral. The crowd around her quieted, sensing the significance of this encounter. Maestro Rostov, she acknowledged with a slight nod, determined to remain composed despite her pounding heart. The man had humiliated her earlier, after all. Your Rachmaninoff was... He paused, searching for the right word. Unexpected. Elena raised an eyebrow. Thank you, I think. A flicker of amusement crossed his face. Where did you study before the city conservatory? Nowhere, Elena replied simply. I started with Mrs. Pacheco at the community center when I was 6, then had various teachers through school. Professor Liang is my first conservatory instructor. Victor's eyebrows rose slightly. Self-taught mostly. My family couldn't afford fancy teachers or private academies, she said with a shrug. But we had a piano, an old upright my mother bought at a yard sale. I practiced whenever I could. Something shifted in Victor's expression, a hint of recognition, perhaps even respect. You have a natural feel for Rachmaninoff. The emotional coloring, especially in the middle section. He gestured with his hands as if physically shaping the music. Many technically skilled players miss that entirely. Coming from Victor Rostov, this was extraordinarily high praise. Elena felt her cheeks warm. Thank you, she said sincerely. I've studied your recordings of the Russian composers extensively. Your interpretation of the third movement of Rachmaninoff's second has been particularly influential on my approach. Victor looked genuinely surprised. You've studied my recordings? Of course, Elena said. Anyone serious about piano has. A slightly uncomfortable silence fell between them. The elephant in the room, his earlier treatment of her, remained unaddressed. Victor cleared his throat. I believe I owe you an apology, Miss Ruiz. Elena waited, saying nothing. I behaved abominably earlier, he continued. I made assumptions about you based on... He gestured at her uniform, circumstances. It was beneath me, and entirely unfair to you. His apology seemed sincere, but Elena wasn't ready to let him off the hook entirely. It's not just me, she said quietly. Many people in service positions are fighting for dreams of their own. They deserve basic respect regardless of their talent level. Victor had the grace to look slightly ashamed. You are absolutely right. He hesitated, then added, "In my defense, though it's a poor one, I've grown too accustomed to a certain bubble. Tonight was a valuable reminder that talent doesn't always announce itself with credentials and connections." Elena nodded, accepting this olive branch. "I appreciate the apology." Victor glanced around at the thinning crowd, then back to Elena. "May I ask what your plans are? After graduation?" Elena sighed. "Honestly, working more restaurant shifts to pay off my student loans while applying to every scholarship and master's program I can find." "You have considerable talent," Victor said thoughtfully. "It would be a waste if financial constraints limited your development." Before Elena could respond, Dr. Rivera approached them, beaming. "Ah, our two pianists of the evening together. I was hoping for this," Victor nodded politely. "Dr. Rivera, you've been hiding exceptional talent in your local conservatory." "Professor Liang has spoken highly of Miss Ruiz for some time," Dr. Rivera replied. "Though I admit even I was surprised by the level of artistry we witnessed tonight." He turned to Elena. "My dear, the response has been overwhelming. Several board members have expressed interest in featuring you in our Young Artists Showcase next season." Elena's eyes widened. "Really? That would be incredible." "It's merely a starting point," Dr. Rivera continued. "And speaking of starting points, Victor, didn't you mention your foundation was looking for new talent to support?" Victor's expression became thoughtful. "Yes, indeed. The Rostov Foundation sponsors several promising musicians each year." He looked directly at Elena. "We provide financial support, mentorship, and performance opportunities." Elena's breath caught in her throat. Was he suggesting what she thought he was? "Would you be interested in applying, Miss Ruiz?" Victor asked. Yes, of course," she managed to say. "Good." Victor reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, handing it to her. "Call my assistant on Monday. We'll arrange an official audition, though after tonight's performance, I consider it merely a formality." Elena accepted the card with slightly trembling fingers. "Thank you. I will. Wonderful." Dr. Rivera clapped his hands together. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I must see to our departing guests. Elena, it was truly a pleasure discovering your talent tonight. I hope we'll be seeing much more of you." As Dr. Rivera moved away, Victor lingered. "Your technique is solid, but there are aspects of your interpretation that could be refined," he said, his tone shifting to that of a teacher. "Your tempo variation in the development section, for instance, bold, but occasionally at the expense of the underlying structure." Elena smiled, recognizing the critique as professional rather than personal. "Professor Liang says I sometimes let emotion override discipline. A common issue for natural talents," Victor nodded, "but far easier to address than the opposite problem. Technique can be taught. Innate musicality cannot." From across the room, a woman from Victor's entourage waved, indicating it was time to leave. "I should go," Victor said. "My flight leaves early tomorrow. Another city, another concert." He hesitated, then extended his hand. "It was enlightening to meet you, Elena Ruiz. I look forward to our paths crossing again." Elena shook his hand firmly. "Thank you for the opportunity, Maestro Rostov." "Victor, please," he corrected. "Colleagues should use first names, don't you think?" With a final nod, he walked away, leaving Elena standing alone, still processing everything that had happened. Mrs. Chen appeared at her side, eyes gleaming with curiosity. "So, what did the great Victor Rostov have to say?" Elena held up his business card, still hardly believing it was real. "He wants me to apply to his foundation. For sponsorship." Mrs. Chen squeezed her arm excitedly. "Didn't I tell you? Opportunities come when you least expect them." "You did," Elena agreed, thinking back to how different her evening had turned out from what she'd expected. "I just never imagined it would happen like this." "Life rarely follows the script we write for it," Mrs. Chen said wisely. "Now the staff is finishing up, but you're no longer on duty. Would you like me to call you a taxi home?" Elena looked around at the nearly empty ballroom, at the servers clearing tables, at the stage where she'd changed her life just hours ago. "Actually, I think I'll help clean up. Those are still my colleagues, after all." Mrs. Chen smiled approvingly. "Success hasn't gone to your head yet. Good. That will serve you well." She patted Elena's shoulder. "Come on then. Many hands make light work." Elena joined the cleanup crew, ignoring their protests that she shouldn't have to help anymore. As she collected empty glasses and folded table linens, She found herself replaying the evening in her mind. The humiliation of the water spill, the terror and exhilaration of performing, the unexpected apology and opportunity that followed. "Hey, piano girl," called Tomas, one of the other servers, as they loaded dishwashers in the kitchen. "Some of us are grabbing late-night tacos when we finish here. You should come. We want to hear all about your secret double life as a musical genius." Elena laughed. "Not a genius, just stubborn. And tacos sound perfect." Later, as they all crowded around a small table at a 24-hour taco shop still in their server uniforms, Elena felt a strange sense of straddling two worlds. Tomorrow, she would call Victor's assistant and begin a journey toward the career she'd always dreamed of. But tonight, she was still just Elena, tired, hungry, sharing stories and laughing with fellow students working their way through school. To Elena, Thomas raised his soda cup in a toast, for showing that rich guy that waitresses can have hidden talents. Everyone cheered, and Elena felt a warmth that had nothing to do with potential fame or success. These people, who worked hard, supported each other, and celebrated each other's victories, were her community. No matter where her music took her, she promised herself she would never forget what it felt like to be on this side of the serving tray. "So," asked Lucia, another server, after the toasts died down, "are you coming back to work next weekend? Or are you too fancy for us now?" Elena grinned. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away. Besides, who knows what important person I might spill water on next?" Their laughter filled the small taco shop, a different kind of music but beautiful in its own way. Monday morning arrived with gray skies and a steady drizzle, but Elena barely noticed the weather as she paced her tiny apartment. Victor Rostov's business card lay on her kitchen table, and she kept glancing at it between sips of cheap coffee. It was 9 o'clock. Professional business hours had officially begun. She could make the call now, but her nerves kept her fingers from reaching for her phone. What if Saturday night had been some kind of dream? What if Victor had changed his mind? What if his assistant had no idea who Elena Ruiz was? A text message notification interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "Have you called yet?" It was from Mrs. Chen, who had insisted on exchanging numbers before Elena left the charity ball. Elena smiled despite her anxiety. "Not yet. Working up the courage." The response came immediately. "Courage is doing things even when you're scared. Call now." Elena took a deep breath. Mrs. Chen was right. She'd played Rachmaninoff in front of a ballroom full of wealthy strangers while wearing a waitress uniform. Surely she could make one phone call. She picked up her phone, dialed the number on the card, and pressed call before she could second-guess herself again. "Rostov Foundation." "This is Natalia speaking," answered a crisp, professional voice. "Hello," Elena said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "My name is Elena Ruiz. Victor Rostov asked me to call regarding a possible audition for the Foundation's sponsorship program." "Ah, yes, Miss Ruiz," Natalia replied without hesitation, much to Elena's relief. "Maestro Rostov mentioned you would be calling. He was quite impressed by your performance at the Symphony Charity Ball. So it hadn't been a dream after all." Elena sank into a kitchen chair, suddenly feeling lightheaded. "We would like to schedule your audition for this Wednesday if that works for you," Natalia continued. "The Foundation's panel meets at the Westmore Hotel's private auditorium at 2 p.m. Can you make that time?" Elena's mind raced. Wednesday at 2 p.m.? She had a class then, and her shift at the restaurant started at 4. But this was the opportunity of a lifetime. "Yes, Wednesday at 2 p.m. works perfectly," she said, mentally rearranging her entire schedule. "Excellent. Please prepare a 20-minute program that showcases your range. The panel will expect at least 2 contrasting pieces from different periods. Maestro Rostov will be present, along with 3 other Foundation board members." Elena scribbled notes frantically on a takeout menu, the only paper within reach. "Got it. 20 minutes, contrasting pieces. The Foundation will email you the formal details shortly. Is there anything else you need to know?" "I don't think so. Thank you for the opportunity." "You're welcome, Miss Ruiz. And if I may add a personal note, Maestro Rostov rarely makes these kinds of recommendations. You must have made quite an impression." After hanging up, Elena let out a whoop of joy that probably disturbed her neighbors. Then reality set in. She had less than 48 hours to prepare an audition program, get permission to miss her Wednesday class, and find someone to cover her restaurant shift. and she needed something decent to wear that wasn't a waitress uniform. The next 2 days flew by in a whirlwind of preparation. Professor Liang, far from being upset about her missing class, was thrilled when she explained why. He cleared his schedule to give her extra coaching Tuesday afternoon. "Your Rachmaninoff is already performance ready," he said as they worked together in the practice room. "For contrast, I suggest Bach, perhaps the Italian concerto. Your technique on it is solid, and it will showcase your precision alongside the emotional range of the Rachmaninoff." Elena nodded. "That's what I was thinking too." Professor Liang studied her thoughtfully. "You know, in 30 years of teaching, I've rarely encountered a student with your natural musicality. I always knew you were special, but watching the video from Saturday night confirmed it." Elena blinked. "There's a video?" "Oh yes," Professor Liang chuckled. "Someone recorded your performance on their phone. It's making quite the rounds among the music faculty. That's why I wasn't surprised by your news about the Rostov Foundation. Your playing speaks for itself." The thought that her performance was being shared and discussed made Elena feel both proud and slightly terrified. It made everything more real somehow. Wednesday arrived sunny and clear, as if the weather itself approved of her audition. Elena woke early to practice one last time on the conservatory's grand piano, then returned home to prepare. She laid out the outfit she had decided on. A simple black dress borrowed from her roommate Zoe, who had insisted Elena take it after hearing her news. "It's your lucky audition dress now," Zoe had declared. "You can return it after you're famous." Elena had pulled her savings to have her hair professionally styled, something she'd never done before, and now she carefully applied minimal makeup, wanting to look polished but not overdone. As she got ready, her phone kept buzzing with good luck messages. Mrs. Chen, the other servers from the charity ball, her classmates, even Dr. Rivera had somehow gotten her number to wish her well. The support was touching, if slightly overwhelming. At 1:15 p.m. she called a rideshare to take her to the Westmore Hotel, the very same hotel where the charity ball had been held. It seemed fitting that she was returning there, but this time through the front door rather than the service entrance. The private auditorium was smaller than she expected, an intimate space with perhaps 50 seats and a beautiful Steinway grand piano center stage. A table had been set up in the middle of the seating area, where 4 people sat with notepads ready. Elena recognized Victor immediately, of course. Next to him was an older woman with silver hair whom Elena had seen at the charity ball, the chairwoman of the foundation, she guessed. The other 2 board members were a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a younger woman who looked vaguely familiar from classical music publications. "Miss Ruiz." Victor stood to greet her. "Thank you for coming. May I introduce our panel? This is Sofia Petrov, our chairwoman, David Lee, our educational director, and Camila Ortiz, who oversees our performance program." Elena shook hands with each of them, trying to keep her nervousness from showing. "We're delighted to meet you after hearing so much from Victor," Sofia said warmly. "Please make yourself comfortable at the piano when you're ready. Take whatever time you need." Elena approached the Steinway, adjusting the bench to her height. She placed her music on the stand, though she knew both pieces by heart. Having the score there was a security blanket of sorts. She took a deep breath, placed her hands on the keys, and began with Bach's Italian concerto. The familiar notes steadied her nerves. Bach's mathematical precision had always provided her with a sense of order and clarity. She focused on articulation, on the clean separation between notes that the piece demanded. As she moved through the first movement, she felt herself settling into the performance, her anxiety giving way to concentration. When she finished the Bach, she took a moment to center herself before transitioning to Rachmaninoff. This was the piece that had changed everything for her just days ago. She wanted to recapture that same magic, that same emotional authenticity. As she played the opening chords, she allowed herself to be transported once again by the music. The Rachmaninoff was like diving into a deep emotional current, sometimes turbulent, sometimes serene, but always powerful. Her fingers responded to her intentions without conscious thought, years of practice creating the muscle memory that freed her to focus purely on expression. When the final notes faded, Elena remained still for a moment, hands hovering above the keys. Then she straightened and turned to face the panel. There was a beat of silence before Sofia began to applaud, followed quickly by the others. Remarkable, Sophia said. Truly remarkable control of dynamics in the Rachmaninoff. Your Bach was precise without being mechanical, David added. That's a difficult balance to achieve. Camilla was nodding. I particularly appreciated your phrasing in the slower sections. Very thoughtful interpretations. Victor had remained silent, watching Elena with an evaluative expression. Finally, he spoke. You played differently than you did Saturday night. Elena wasn't sure if that was a criticism or an observation. In what way? Saturday had more raw emotion, perhaps because of the circumstances, Victor said. Today was more controlled, more considered. Both approaches have their merits. The panel asked her a few technical questions about her interpretation choices, then moved on to questions about her background, her musical education, and her goals. Elena answered honestly, explaining her community center beginnings, her struggles to afford proper training, and her dream of eventually teaching while maintaining a performance career. Well, Miss Ruiz, Sophia said finally, I think we've heard and learned enough to make our decision. She exchanged glances with the other panel members who all nodded. We would be honored to welcome you to the Rostov Foundation's Young Artists Program. Elena's breath caught. Really? Really, Sophia confirmed with a smile. Your talent is exceptional, and your journey is precisely what our foundation aims to support. The sponsorship includes a monthly stipend, performance opportunities, masterclass access, and mentorship. She looked pointedly at Victor. I would be pleased to serve as your primary mentor, Victor added, if you're agreeable. Elena could hardly believe what she was hearing. Just days ago, she had been a struggling student worried about making tuition payments. Now she was being offered financial support and mentorship from one of the world's premier pianists, the very same man who had once dismissed her as just the help. I don't know what to say, she managed finally, except thank you. Thank you all so much for this opportunity. Don't thank us, Victor said, his expression serious. You've earned this through years of hard work and natural talent. We're simply removing the obstacles that shouldn't have been in your path to begin with. As the panel members gathered their things, Victor approached Elena at the piano. Your Bach was excellent, he said quietly. But I meant what I said about Saturday night's performance. There was something raw and honest in it that's rare to find. Don't lose that authenticity as you gain polish. Elena nodded, taking the advice seriously. I won't. Good, Victor said with a small smile. Now I believe we have some paperwork to complete, and then perhaps we should discuss your first official performance as a Rostov Foundation artist. I was thinking the Symphony Spring Gala might be appropriate. Full circle, wouldn't you say? As they walked together toward the auditorium doors, Elena realized this wasn't an ending but a beginning. The real work, the exciting, challenging work of becoming the artist she was meant to be, was just starting. 6 months had passed since the night Elena spilled water on Viktor Rostov's sleeve. 6 months of intense training, of financial stability thanks to the foundation's stipend, of gradually adjusting to a life where music was now her focus rather than something squeezed between work shifts. Tonight was the Symphony Spring Gala, the event Victor had mentioned immediately after her audition. Elena stood backstage in a midnight blue gown, running through her performance piece one last time in her head. She would be playing Tchaikovsky's Piano Concerto No. 1, accompanied by the symphony orchestra, her first time performing with a full orchestra. Nervous? Victor appeared beside her, elegant in his tuxedo. Their relationship had evolved over these months from purely teacher-student to something more like colleagues, though he still pushed her mercilessly during their sessions. Terrified, Elena admitted with a small smile, but the good kind of terrified. Victor nodded approvingly. That never goes away, you know. The butterflies. Even after 30 years of performing. Really? You still get nervous before shows? Of course. The day I don't feel anything before walking on stage is the day I should retire. He glanced at his watch. 20 minutes. Do you want to run through any problem areas one last time? Elena shook her head. I'll just overthink it. Better to trust the practice. Wise decision, Victor agreed. Your instincts are good, Elena. Trust them. A stagehand approached, clipboard in hand. 10-minute call for Miss Ruiz. The house is full and Dr. Rivera would like a word before you go on. As the stagehand left, Victor placed a hand briefly on Elena's shoulder. You've prepared thoroughly. The rest is just sharing what you love with the audience. I'll be watching from the wings." He walked away, leaving Elena alone with her thoughts and the distant murmur of the gathering audience. Dr. Rivera appeared moments later, his round face beaming with excitement. "Elena, I just wanted to wish you luck before you go on, though I doubt you need it. Your rehearsal with the orchestra yesterday was magnificent." "Thank you for the opportunity, Dr. Rivera," Elena said sincerely. "I still can't believe I'm here." "Believe it," he replied. "You earned this spot through talent and hard work. The audience is in for a treat tonight." He leaned closer, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "By the way, I've seated Mrs. Chen and her husband in the front row. She wouldn't miss this for the world." Warmth spread through Elena's chest. Mrs. Chen had become something of a fairy godmother figure in her life, checking in regularly and celebrating each of her accomplishments with genuine pride. There's also a table of very enthusiastic young people who claim to be your former co-workers from the restaurant. Dr. Rivera continued, eyes twinkling. They're quite excited. One of them has a sign, though I've politely asked him to keep it lowered during the actual performance. Elena laughed, picturing Thomas and the others cheering her on. Despite her increasingly busy schedule, she had maintained those friendships, occasionally picking up a Sunday brunch shift just to stay connected to that part of her life. 5 minutes, Miss Ruiz, the stagehand called. Dr. Rivera squeezed her hand encouragingly. Showtime soon. Break a leg, my dear. As he walked away, Elena took a deep breath and smoothed down her gown. Unlike the borrowed dress from her audition, this one had been specially made for her, a gift from the foundation for her debut. The stylist had insisted the deep blue complemented her complexion perfectly, and the modest cut with subtle sparkle struck the right balance between elegant and youthful. She thought back to the waitress uniform she'd worn the first time she played in this venue. What a journey these 6 months had been. Professor Liang appeared next, his normally stern face softened with pride. My finest student, he said simply. Ready to take flight. Thank you for everything, Elena told him. I wouldn't be here without your guidance. Nonsense, Professor Liang waved off the gratitude. I merely pointed the way. You walked the path yourself. He hesitated, then added, Your parents would have been so proud. The mention of her parents brought a bittersweet pang. They had both passed away when Elena was in her teens. Her father from heart disease, her mother 2 years later from cancer. They had been the ones to nurture her early love of music, scraping together money for that yard sale upright piano, sitting through countless amateur recitals with unflagging enthusiasm. I like to think they can see this somehow, Elena said softly. Professor Liang nodded. Music transcends all boundaries. Play for them tonight. Places, Miss Ruiz, the stagehand called. Orchestra is ready. With final encouraging nods from both Victor and Professor Liang, Elena walked to the stage entrance. She could see the orchestra members already seated, the conductor waiting at his podium, the gleaming grand piano positioned perfectly center stage. The concertmaster tapped his bow for attention, and the orchestra tuned one final time. Then the conductor turned to the audience, arms raised for silence. Ladies and gentlemen, his voice carried through the hall. The symphony is proud to present a rising star in the classical music world. Please welcome to the stage Elena Ruiz. For the applause began as Elena stepped into the light. She walked confidently to the piano, acknowledging the orchestra with a nod before taking her seat. As she adjusted the bench, she caught sight of Mrs. Chen in the front row, beaming with pride and several rows back, her former co-workers trying and failing to look sophisticated while barely containing their excitement. The conductor approached her for a brief, quiet exchange. Ready when you are, he said. Elena nodded, positioned her hands, and gave him the signal. He raised his baton, and with a decisive downbeat, the orchestra began the famous opening chords of Tchaikovsky's concerto. Elena's entrance came seconds later, her fingers flying across the keys in the thunderous opening passage. As she played, she felt that familiar sense of disappearing into the music, of becoming merely a vessel for something larger than herself. But tonight, there was something else too, a heightened awareness of the journey that had brought her here. Each note seemed to carry a piece of her story. The little girl practicing on a second-hand piano, the teenager mourning her parents while finding solace in music, the struggling student waiting tables to pay tuition, the humiliated waitress who found courage at a critical moment. and now the emerging artist embracing her calling. The first movement flew by in what felt like seconds, though Elena knew it was nearly 20 minutes long. The audience remained spellbound throughout, the usual coughs and shifting of a large crowd noticeably absent. When the powerful final chords resounded through the hall, there was a moment of complete silence before the applause erupted, sudden and thunderous. Elena remained seated, catching her breath as the sound washed over her. She would still perform the second and third movements, but this brief pause between movements allowed her a moment to connect with what was happening. She was here, living her dream, sharing her gift with hundreds of people who were moved by her playing. As she launched into the more contemplative second movement, Elena caught sight of Victor watching from the wings, his expression a mixture of professional assessment and genuine pride. She had worked incredibly hard these past months under his exacting tutelage. There had been frustrating days, tearful days when she questioned whether she truly belonged in this world of elite musicians. But there had also been breakthrough moments, when Victor nodded silently after she mastered a difficult passage, when she first heard herself with the orchestra during rehearsal, when she received her first standing ovation at a small foundation recital. Each step forward had built her confidence, confirming that the girl who once served champagne to wealthy patrons deserved her place at the piano just as much as anyone born into privilege. The concerto's fiery third movement demanded every ounce of her technical skill and emotional energy. Elena gave herself over to it completely, her body swaying slightly as her hands raced across the keyboard. When she struck the final triumphant chord in perfect synchrony with the orchestra, she knew she had given the performance everything she had. This time, the audience rose immediately to their feet. Elena stood to acknowledge them, bowing first to the audience, then turning to acknowledge the orchestra and conductor. Flowers appeared from somewhere, handed to her by the concertmaster, a gorgeous bouquet of blue and white blooms. As she took her bows, Elena spotted familiar faces throughout the crowd. Mrs. Chen was openly wiping tears. Thomas had completely abandoned decorum and was whistling loudly. Professor Liang was applauding with uncharacteristic abandon. Dr. Rivera was beaming from the director's box. And in the third row, Elena was surprised to see some of the regular customers from the restaurant, the ones who had never noticed her before the charity ball. After several curtain calls, Elena finally exited the stage, immediately enveloped in a hug from Victor. "Magnificent," he said simply. "You honored the music and yourself." Elena was still catching her breath, the adrenaline of performance making her hands tremble slightly. "Thank you for everything. This is just the beginning," Victor reminded her. "There will be challenges ahead. Tougher critics, higher expectations, the constant pressure to grow artistically. It won't always be standing ovations." "I know," Elena nodded, "but I'm ready for the journey." Victor smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his normally serious face. "Yes, I believe you are." As they walked together toward the reception area where well-wishers would be gathering, Elena thought about the strange twist of fate that had brought her here. A spilled pitcher of water, a moment of humiliation, a chance to prove herself. Sometimes life's worst moments led to unexpected opportunities. "You're thinking very deeply for someone who just received a standing ovation," Victor observed. Elena laughed, just reflecting on how quickly life can change. 6 months ago I was worried about making rent. Now I'm worried about my interpretation of Prokofiev for next month's recital. Better problems to have, wouldn't you say? "Definitely better problems," Elena agreed. They paused at the door that would lead them to the reception. Beyond it waited admirers, critics, colleagues, friends, her past and her future mingling together. "Ready?" Victor asked. Elena took a deep breath and nodded. "Ready?" Together they stepped forward into the next chapter of her remarkable journey.